Was the black male agenda accomplished in the 2020 presidential debates? Throughout the annals of history, it appears that men of color have often been unrepresented. In this remastered classic, Dr. Ronald Neal, my dear friend Gary Scott, will determine which two sides actually advocated for the tranquility, peace, and salubrity of black men in America. We're going to explore the dynamics in the historical context of politics, as politics means to influence, and we're going to have a critical analysis of how men of color have been disenfranchised in part one. And then in the second part, we're going to explore how the black church has played a critical role in this political nexus. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this show, as this is the 23rd episode of The Man Who Chronicles, a remastered edition. And remember this: if it ain't seven, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. Enjoy. Tell me why you're so poignant and so, how can I say, so passionate about the current political spectrum and what needs to be implemented as we move forward.
Yeah, why am I passionate? Well, because, black men at this very moment are dealing with the consequences of more than 5 decades of policies in terms of criminal courts, in terms of family courts, and also unspoken policies in terms of employment that have happened, wreaked devastation on the black male population, mainly crafted under liberal administration. So we're in a moment right now where Joseph Biden is the candidate, the nominee for the Democratic Party. Biden is in his 70s, and he's a part of that generation who was key and instrumental in unleashing a political culture with addressing that hole, addressing underdevelopment, addressing the impact of mass incarceration, addressing the impact of underemployment, addressing the impact of decades of educational underdevelopment and underachievement on the part of black boys and black male youth, and dealing with those policies, as well as dealing with the culture. So you have a legal culture that's been a part of it, but there's also a de facto culture. What I mean by that, there has been this non-extra legal culture in America where there's this consensus that says that we are not going to intervene, we are not going to improve the lives of black men. And in this culture, this legal culture, black women have been used as weapons. Black women have been used as convenient tools on the part of liberals and leftists in their efforts to remove black men from the American economy. It's not something that black women created themselves, but they just became useful for liberals, for feminists, and even conservatives. And that history goes back to the 1970s. And so here we are in 2020, and for the first time in that I can recall, you have a political system who is recognizing both the Democrats and the Republicans, recognizing black men as a demographic, recognizing black men's influence in terms of this upcoming election. And so my work deals with that. My writing has been primarily in the realm of politics and religion. And I've written about the South, and I've written about also masculinity, written about black men. So I have publications that deal with the existence, the lives of black men. And so those are those are my concerns in a very, very broad fashion. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation.
Well, you know, I coined this title a political coup d'etat, meaning there are people within the political realm that are more or less trying to subvert how black men think as it relates to this election. Unfortunately, we have family members that say, well, you need to vote this way or vote that way. But when we look at the policies, Dr. Neal, correct me if I'm wrong, I do not think that there have been policies that have been more or less advantageous to the efficacy of men of color. And because of that, I think this current election is perhaps the most important election probably ever in human history. Looking at political trends and looking at the historical context of politics and how it impacts the psyche of men, because believe it or not, as a clinician, this plays a long-term role on the psyche of men and their ultimate mental health. And many might not think it does, but it does, because men are still seen in that traditional role of being providers and protectors. And when there are policies that are more or less adversive to black men and black families, as a clinician, I think that can be something that's going to be problematic. So I want you to speak on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, this country has not prioritized black men in particular, but it hasn't really been concerned with men, particularly men who have been adversely affected by changes in the economy. Okay, and so I mean, here we are again, man. You know, 40 years, you know, after the civil rights era, and we've experienced a great deal of change. You know, we went from an industrial society to a post-industrial society. I mean, I think all of us are old enough to remember black men who had jobs in plants, black men who worked in mills, black men who worked in the industrial sector, okay, who were able to make some type of life for themselves, which allowed them to have families, take care of their children. Of course, not all black men, you know, were employed under those circumstances, but you did have a good number of men who were, and so when there was a shift economically, all right, and things began to change, you know, black men, you know, we were the ones who were affected the most in terms of unemployment and our inability to really adjust, you know, coincided with this emphasis rather on Democrats, liberals, or whatever, to shift away from male workers in particular to female workers. Okay, so we had a huge push in terms of women and their employment, their education, and that sort of thing. There was a significant, you know, emphasis in terms of the economy, technological economy, and jobs that were really catered towards people who were in the middle to upper classes. But the black male majority has historically been a working class majority, has been working class, has been lower middle class. We have always had a very small professional class of black men. And so when you talk about how, you know, economic changes affect the well-being of men, you have to really think about the inability of men to make that transition. The government was not a part of that. The government just did not prioritize men written large, but black men in particular. And so what happened? We had the growth rather of the underground economy. Okay, so you know, as the society shifted from industrial to post-industrial to technological, you know, what took its place, man? You know, we had heroin, there was cocaine, crack cocaine. You had guns, you had a variety of markets that opened up based on illegal employment. And, you know, as a consequence of that, many of us became part of the prison industrial complex. And so now here we have men who have spent, you know, decades in federal prisons. Men have been spending long periods of time in state prisons, who are having to readjust, to reintegrate into society, who have trauma and all that sort of thing, trying to connect with, you know, with children that they left behind. So, I mean, you know, the levels of issues that we have to deal with are just immense. And so, yes, the United States government has neglected us, and it's only been, you know, within the last 3 months with the situation with George Floyd, And what we saw, George Floyd for me represented that pivotal moment where black male disposability, America's treatment of black men was symbolized. The whole world got to see.
Right.
And when that happened, I said, listen, this is how the United States has dealt with black men. This is how the United States government, its policies have dealt with us. And so, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Seven, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So
I can't hear anything.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that we're in a place where we have to deal with the psychological, as you articulated, the psychological effects of structural problems that could have been prevented, problems that could have been dealt with through all sorts of interventions, but they were not, because we were not seen as a priority.
And when you talk about priority, and then you also, more or less blend that in with apparel politics. And it's sad, Dr. Neal, that a lot of times when it comes down to when we talk about men rights and men rights issues that's related to the black family, it's almost like black males are expected to be quiet and go along to get along, instead of having a voice that's going to amplify to the position that's going to have us being the exemplars in our homes and our communities. And when you think about from your research, people of color traditionally have been, have been very conservative. And we have not always more or less encapsulated ourselves more or less with some of the liberal constructs that you see now. Let's talk about why it's so important to be apolitical instead of more or less ingratiating ourselves in any political party. Because a lot of people get caught up in party politics instead of policy politics. And so let's talk about why it's so important to be more or less ingratiated in policy politics instead of party politics. Can you hear us, Garrett?
Yes.
It's unfortunately, we do not, as black people, we do not have a real rigorous political culture. And what I mean by that is that we don't have, so you look at the white population, no single political party represents the white population, okay? You've got whites who are Republican, whites who are Democrat, you have whites who are a part of the Green Party, you've got all type of affiliations, okay?
Right.
And that's because white people treat politics in terms of interests, okay?
Right.
And unfortunately, we have a politics that deals not necessarily with interests, but it deals with our connections to things in the past. It deals with feelings. It deals with just a kind of uncritical connection to how we voted 50 and 60 years ago. Okay, and the extent to which white liberals have been, effective in selling us this idea that liberal politics in and of itself is the best thing for black people. And you're correct. We're traditionally a conservative population, but we connected with this liberal machine largely because of some of the benefits that came with it in terms of state support, government employment, in terms of welfare and the like, and kinds of interventions that help to keep the capitalists from being too totalitarian, too hegemonic with respect to black labor and the like. But here we are now, and many black men are realizing that we need to shift and really look at our interests, because the reality right now, and it's not just been at this very moment, but this has been this way for some time, is that when you look at two parties and you look at the way in which they treated black people, writ at large, and black men in particular, you don't see, huge differences. I mean, I go back, we can go back to 1994 and that crime bill. I mean, that was a bipartisan endeavor, okay? Bill Clinton, when he became president in 92, then he was reelected in 96, Bill Clinton made it real clear that he was going to appease large numbers of conservatives, those on the right, which he did, and so we never really looked at that. We never looked at that, and it never prompted us to become more independent in our thinking. So right now, I mean, we're seeing the legacy of Clinton era. I mean, the Biden-Harris ticket. All right, it's a moribund, it is an old, tired paradigm that we've already been through, okay? And so what we have to do is we have to step back, okay, and look at what is happening in terms of, the black community. Also look at what has happened under, black politicians, black mayors, black state representatives, black congresspersons, and the like. We have to step back and see what's going on, all right? And so on the other side of it, you've got Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, he is, bigging up the fact that, the unemployment rate has been low under his administration, that you do have black people who are working more now under Trump, interestingly than under Obama in previous, administrations. He had the Second Chance Act, which he signed into law, where you have a good number of black people who are in federal prisons who, are now no longer in prison. And he's focusing primarily on economics. So the whole thing about immigration has always been an issue for black people because immigrant labor means competition in the work arena, okay? Right. And we've always had that, going back, more than 100 years of competition between native-born black people and people who are not here legally, okay? And so when we talk about interests, we have to deal with, what are our material interests? What do we have? What are we invested in terms of economics? What are we invested in terms of jobs? What are we invested in if you're a person who is in business in terms of being viable and solvent in terms of being a business person? To my money, okay, and dollars and cents, and liberal politics is not doing that. So liberal politics is about identity, it's about recognition, it's about visibility, it's about all sorts of intangible things that you can't do anything with, you can't cash in, okay? And so here we are, black men who are being courted, are in this position now to think differently and behave in a way that we haven't done in the past. Which means that we are what we're doing, many of us, and what is going to happen, I think, as we go forward, is to really, to draw a line in the sand within black society, saying that we're going to have to move away from the way black folks have done things. And that may mean that black men have to become its own political demographic, its own entity, to champion its own interests.
And so a lot of times, I call it the convenient come up, and I coined it the convenient come up because many use black men as the step stool to their own political agenda, whatever it might be. And then once they use us as a political come up, that gravitas is not really redirected back in our communities. So we know that racial profiling play a role or has been a role, but I do not believe that racial profiling is the biggest issue in the black community. Is it part of it? Yes. But when you look at mass incarceration, which is very deleterious to the black community, you look at infanticide that was started by Margaret Sanger. You look at all those other negative nuances where you got paternity fraud, you got a lot of other different things. Why do we tend to harken on racial profiling, even though that's really minute? Not saying it does not exist, but we tend to harp on that when that's not really our biggest issue. And like I tell a lot of white conservatives, they say, well, your own people killing each other. Well, I said, listen, ethnic conflict is nothing new. ethnic conflict has been going on for years. You are a theologian. When you go back to southern Judah and northern Judah, they fought against one another. When you look at the axis of power and the major wars that have been more or less inducted over the years, it was an ethnic conflict. So for some reason, some of the white conservatives, they say, oh, well, your own black people kill each other, which in essence absolves them of any form of guilt. But at the same time, even though that it's not necessarily, how can I say, it's not necessarily racial profiling is an issue. You can't equivocate racial profiling with, how can I say it, you can't equivocate racial profiling with, you cannot equivocate racial profiling with black on black violence, because every ethnic group has been complicit in its own demise. But for some reason, Dr. Neal, when it comes down to black people, where your own people kill each other, and that's almost like it gives them like some kind of get out of jail card, instead of saying that a lot of times, if the things that exist in Chicago, it's more or less indicative of lack of resources, and also a system of racial supremacy that more or less extraction the sensitive egos of black people. So but then the thing I have a problem with, Dr. Neal, when you think about groups like Black Lives Matter, they don't say anything about what's going on. They don't say anything about mass incarceration, and they don't say anything about what's going on as it relates to black men that are killing each other in Chicago. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has happened, you have to go back to the 1980s. Jesse Jackson, he popularized the language of black on black violence. Back in the 80s, his context was Chicago, and what happened was, white journalists picked up on that. They picked up on that during the 1980s, and they never let it go. Okay, and what happened, instead of dealing with the big picture of black life in terms of looking at, so-called black on black violence, that's what you just said, these are internal conflicts that happen regardless of, ethnicity or what have you.
Yes, sir.
But also it's a reflection of poverty. It's a reflection of tension. It's a reflection of economic stress. All right. And so we haven't, unfortunately, in the political domain, and this goes back to what I was saying about us not having a real mature politics. That is, that the people who speak, who have the platforms, who have, been anointed as kind of spokespersons for black people, they have focused on symbolic stuff, symbolic issues, over against real concrete material concerns. No, you're absolutely right. Police, racial profiling and all that stuff, that's just a symptom of something that is much larger. Okay, it's not, it's not the cause, it's not the root cause, and we get caught up on it. So Al Sharpton, you think about it. Al Sharpton basically made his career in New York City, dealing with racial profiling and dealing with police violence and the like. We don't know Sharpton for anything else. We don't know him for economic development. We don't know Al Sharpton for reparations. All right. We don't know Al Sharpton for mass incarceration. All right. We don't know Al Sharpton for a plethora of concerns that affect the lives of black men. And so Al Sharpton represents the kind of impoverished leadership that we've had, that has led us, which has prevented us from developing a different type of politics, okay? So here's the thing, so the folks who have been talking about reparations for decades and decades and decades, okay, they are just now, getting a larger voice, okay? They're still somewhat on the margins, but, they're there. And, the Black Lives Matter people, again, I mean, when you think about, how they're oriented, we recognize that we do have gays and lesbians and transgenders and, different people with different orientations in our communities, but their stuff is driven by identity and symbolism, okay? And the ideas about being visible and being recognized, and their politics is surface politics. Okay, and so policing, the defunding the police thing. I mean, listen. I mean, again, dealing with the police is the least of our concerns.
Right.
And what has to happen right now is that, and unfortunately, we have technology now. We have a tool, the internet, which didn't exist, 20 years ago. Now we can have these sorts of conversations, and we can influence other Black people, other Black men, other demographics. We can influence the entire political discourse. All right, that impacts, Black people.
Dr. Neal, hold your point. I want to bring Brother Scott in. I want him to segue what you're talking about. Gary, I want you to tell us about your passion and your mission. And Dr. Neal is talking about some very poignant issues. I want you to share with Dr. Neal what your interest is. Why did you come up with your passion about this current bill that you're trying to get pushed as it relates to non-marital contract law? I want you to talk about that real quick.
Well, what energized my attention to it is, I went through a couple of divorces and stuff, which provided me or encouraged me to dive into learning law. And when I started learning the law, learning the local codes, statutes, and actual laws, you'll be shocked at what's in this stuff. You'll be shocked at how this stuff impacts us and what we don't know. I remember going to a school function for a local high school, and I seen all the programs that they had, cosmetology, robotics, and this was at a predominantly Black school / Guatemalan. It was a historically Black high school, but the influx of Guatemalans at the school is like 50-50. But I seen all the programs that they had, all the ROTC. They had everything you could think of, whereas economically, leaving that school, you would think you'd be crazy that you couldn't make a living.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Yeah, keep talking.
Go, here we go. Okay. I think that.
I think you fell off. All right. So Dr. Neal, finish your conversation, your frame of thought about what you said.
We haven't prioritized the lives, of Black men and our concerns, which are material and having to do with, first and foremost, I say it in terms of economics, in terms of economic enfranchisement. And then after that, we have education, our educational development. We've done a horrible job in terms of black boys and Black male youth in reading, writing, mathematics, and science. We've done a horrible job at that level, and so we have to address that, as well. And we haven't had a kind of politics to deal with that. In addition to that, there's health. I mean, it's the fact that it's our mortality. We have the shortest lifespans out of all, demographics in the United States. White women have the longest lives in this country. Black men have the shortest lives. You know what I mean? And with hypertension, diabetes, obesity, all sorts of things. COVID has, really, demonstrated the extent to which our health issues are in a crisis state at this very moment, And so, we have been subject to a great deal of political neglect at every level, at the state level, local, state, and at the federal level. And for this reason, we have to pause and reassess the entire game of politics.
Well, the crazy thing when you think about the impact of what's going on in our community, especially as it relates to Black men, it's almost like there's a solace. It's it's almost like, we could care less. You talked about disposable male syndrome, where a lot of men are actually feel like they don't have really a voice in their homes or in the communities. And so when we articulate our cause as it relates to the community, you got a segment of our people, even though we're not monolithic, that's more concerned about their belly. When you think about the aversive policies that are still implemented or more or less used towards black men in the community, where do you see the current trends going, Dr. Neal, as it relates to black men in the black community?
In terms of, you mean present day policies? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir. Present day policies, right?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, it's more, unless there's some serious intervention, it's going to be more of the same. And I think, this election is going to say a lot in terms of who shows up, who gets elected, what the election outcomes will be. It will say a lot. It's going to be it's going to be a moratorium, even though black men are like, we're 20 million, strong in this country with, 6% of the population. It's going to really say a lot about our condition. And it's going to, if it's the case that black men are able to really disrupt the election, okay, and affect it in ways that place greater light on our issues, then that means that you're going to have two political parties who are going to have to reassess its relationship, to black men. And it will give black men an opportunity to put forward, an agenda, a set of priorities for, these parties to take up, and so that's why, black male, politics right now is so imperative, but if things don't change, if things remain as they are, we're just going to see more of the same. We'll see more black male disposability. You'll see younger black men get caught up in it, and it will just just continue a rerun of what we know.
Well, Dr. Neal, I'm gonna bring Gary back in, and we're going to talk about in a minute. We're going to talk about if there is a black male agenda, what would it look like? If we had to craft a 17-point or a 20-point black male agenda, what would it look like? Now, Gary, you were talking about, once again, you were talking about the negative impact of the current marriage contract law. And, and I think you and I probably have talked about paternity fraud. But once again, I want you to reiterate why it was so important to bring forth this new agenda as it relates to a black male agenda in this current political maze. I want you to finish talking about that.
Yes, let me apologize for this interruption, but just going back to what I was coming from, I was making a point there that this starts early on in the black male life. And what it is ignorance. And ignorance is, when you hear the word, it's a bad word, you're just ignorant. You don't know.
Just don't know, right.
What feeds the I don't know, what feeds the ignorance is the schooling. And, we have this thing called the Constitution. And so that's a very important document. It's important to us that it be upheld toward us. And so when I went to this school and I seen all the programs that they had, one thing I asked the guidance counselor was, okay, these kids get all of this stuff, they get all of these trades and businesses and stuff. Is there a class teaching them about their rights and law and everything? And they said, nope, we don't have anything of that nature. And this is a huge school full of black and brown students that know nothing about their rights. They don't even know how to invoke their rights. They don't even know what the word invoke means. But yet this is a school that's teaching us, teaching our kids. The thing is, when parents are working, we don't have time to teach. We send them to this school that we're mandated to send them to, yet they don't teach them the necessary things to sustain life, to sustain their rights to protect themselves. And so what that does is you grow up and you want to get married, you want a family. That is the foundation of blackness. That's the foundation of any race. It's marriage, children, family. All right, when that is not able to be upheld within our community, everything else is going to be in shambles. All right, so how I got into this is I was married for 13 years, had 3 beautiful kids. Suffered a divorce, and what I found is no matter how much I loved my children, no matter how much I wanted to spend time with them, that court is going to take my children away from me. All right, so I'm looking at fatherhood in the black community. It's scarce. They say 70% of all black children are born out of wedlock. Okay? Also, 70% of all marriages are initiated by the wives. All right? You need to watch how this is going to tie in. Okay?
You mean divorce?
In the 1960s, 50s, black families stayed together. The divorce rate was around 22-25%.
Right.
By 1975, the divorce rate was 70% of the black community. Within 7 to 10 years, divorce skyrocketed, and nobody asked why. This is what happened. In 1970, then Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first of its kind, no fault divorce law.
Yeah.
Before that, you had to have a valid, proven reason why your divorce could be granted.
Yes, sir.
After this legislation in California, which Governor Ronald Reagan was, that you didn't need a reason. If you wanted to divorce, you just walk up to the courthouse, say we have a reconcile.
Can you hear him?
No, I can't hear him. No.
Gary, we can't hear you, brother.
Can't hear you. Get the mic sound.
Can't hear you, Gary. Can't you hear him?
You have to come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's having technical issues, but but when you look at what I call the melange, when you look at the melange, Dr. Neal, of the black family prior to what I call the Lyndon B. Johnson Trojan horse, there was a lot more stability in the black community, and the black church was very paramount in the fortification of the black community. But I want you to talk about this. You got a degree in religion as well. The thing that more or less paralyzes my psyche is that some of our parishioners vote for policies that are really antithetical to scripture if you want to take it there. And I think it's going to have a long-term, it's having a long-term implications on the psyche and the mental health psyche of a lot of our kids and our boys. But I could never understand why parishioners, when you look at the authentic word of God, a lot of times they don't vote based on the tenets of the scripture first. And some could say it's based on interpretation, but some things are very clear. When you talk about infanticide, when you talk about other issues that are pertinent to the stability of the black community. And it's always baffled me that we never talked about it. But Gary's back. Gary, I want you to finish your point of view. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I really want. I'm sorry about the technical but to continue, after that legislation was signed by Ronald Reagan, you have to understand California was a very popular state back then. All the legislation in California did. You have to understand that Jackie Robinson was out there, and his family was basically free. All right. So California was like a model for the country to go to. So when Ronald Reagan signed that legislation, every other state within the union created their own no-fault divorce law. So no-fault divorce covered the whole state within the whole country within 2 years. That's how divorce skyrocketed. All right. When divorce skyrocketed, what happened? Remember I said 70% of the children are born out of wedlock in the black community right now. Back then it wasn't so before 1970. Okay? So when those laws took place, divorce skyrocketed. Now you have children without fathers. Okay? In 1975, there was drafted a legislation that's non-positive law. It wasn't voted in by Congress. It's called Title 4D of the Social Security Act. All right, you got Title 4A, You got Title 4B, C, E, B, C, D, and E. And Title 4E is foster care. All right, Title 4D is child support. Title 4A is just blanket welfare, all that stuff. All of these social programs are coming from Social Security, and they're covered under different titles. All right, Title 4D is child support. That's all it is. All right, so in 1975, with the influx of people going on the welfare rolls because of the divorce rate, they had to come up with something to say, hey, we're giving off this welfare, and these fathers supposedly aren't doing anything. Okay, so they come up with this Title 4D to supposedly recoup funds back from the people who were going on welfare. All right, what happened was when they implemented it, they found out that there was not a lot of people getting on the welfare rolls like they thought. Okay, so then they included all families that were getting divorced to get into the Title 4D program. That means when you get divorced, it's almost automatic that the husband is going to be placed on forced child support, regardless of what he was doing for his kids already. Okay? So then they put you on, you have to understand, why would a government authority take so much interest in you taking care of your kids when you're not asking the government for anything? You're not on welfare, you're not getting anything from the public, but yet they have a strong interest in making you getting inside of your life, making you pay someone else money. You gotta ask yourself, if I'm paying money directly to my child's mother or a child's father, then how are the people who are processing the stuff, how are they making their money? So they're not doing it for free. That's where Title 4D comes in. For every dollar that they collect from a marriage, the state will recoup 66% in federal matching dollars. Not only that, they get incentive funding, which is Title 42, subsection 658 alpha, which is titled incentive funding to the states for child support. So for every dollar that they recoup and basically passing wealth, they're going to get $12 on the dollar. All right, and let me tell you something. This program is contract. The federal government contracts with the state. The state then contracts with each county within the state. Okay, in order for that state to get what is called TANF funding, which is temporary assistance for needy families, that state has to run a child support program. Okay, so it doesn't have to be. They don't have to have a child support program, but in order to recoup all those millions and billions of dollars, they're going to implement a child support program, which makes them incentivize divorce. They're incentivizing. They're paying people to get divorced. They're paying the kid's mother, and the state is going to reap benefits as well. So where does that leave men? That leaves men being slaves. Okay? They're waiting on you when they sell you a marriage license. That's the ticket for them to get into your family, to get into your business, and for them to do everything they want to do to you and suck you dry of your property and finances. When you get a marriage license, if you don't get that marriage license, you cut them off from dealing with you, from dealing with your money, stealing your money. All right? So the thing we have to be careful, even in birth certificates, guys, this is so deep. And I know I'm going on because this is very important information that I want to get out, because I'm really angry with the churches, the black church, because we have just dropped the ball. Back years ago when Martin Luther King was walking the streets, when Malcolm X was walking the streets, there was awareness. There was awareness on how this government is going to trick us, how this government is going to try to steal from us, how this government doesn't care about us. But they killed them two guys off, and many others that were trying to tell us. Now we have a culture of fearful pastors that don't want to give our community the bona fide truth about what's going on, but they want to have institutions of emotion, institutions of jumping around, turning flips, and crying off, but yet we leave these institutions, we leave these gatherings just as dumb as we were when we walked in. Right. We don't know any more law, we don't know any more statutes, codes. don't know any more smarts. The police are killing us. All right, police are because they're doing anything they want to us. Yet we go to these churches. And reason I pick on the church because that's the one day that you can get most of us coming together as black people.
Let me, okay. Gary. I want to come across. I want to give me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
But going further though, we need to really dive into Title 4D because that is wreaking havoc not only on the black community but everyone. Okay, for the state and the attorney general for each state. That's why I don't like Kamala Harris because she knows exactly what's going on. Those millions of dollars in federal matching dollars for Title 4D come straight through her office because she was the attorney general for California. Okay, so she knows what Title 4D is doing to black families and white families, Mexican families, and every other family. She knows. But the thing is, we have an ignorant public. We have an ignorant mass of people who don't know what's actually going on, and behind it all is money.
Hold your point.
The Bar Association. Let me tell you something about Kamala Harris. Not to be switching subjects, but we're having all the knowledge of the influx of federal money coming into the state. All right, this lady. I don't know if you know Jamal Truelove. Anyone ever heard of Jamal Truelove? This is the guy who was acquitted of his supposed crime after Kamala Harris paid witnesses to testify against him. It's a black guy. She paid witnesses to testify against him even during his proclamation of his innocence. He never said he was guilty. He always claimed he was innocent. He ended up winning a $13.1 million lawsuit in California because, he was innocent. But she was hell-bent on prosecuting that man. He was a black guy. And the black community doesn't want to see that. And she ended up paying Jamal Truelove to go on social media, make a video that he loves her so much and he forgives her. And everything. Dude, we're not food. We know she paid you. Because that's the one story that got out to the masses of black folks. We wouldn't want anything to do with Kamala Harris.
Gary, hold your point. Hold your point. Dr. Neal, why is there such a cognitive dissonance? Because
I can't hear you, man. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Yeah. Why is there such a cognitive dissonance when it comes down to issues that Gary is talking about? And we present the empirical information, but there's like from a theological lens, they have ears but cannot hear, and they have eyes but cannot see. It's almost like there's a haze over our community. We understand that we live in a gynocracy or a matriarchy where there's not strong male leadership. But why is it that when you pontificate those core rules and those core values, there's a subliminal silence? I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have been conditioned to look at politics strictly through the lens of morality, and that's the negative side of the church's influence on black politics. Okay, so I give an example. So Barack Obama, he was able to really impact black people and get black people to get behind him just based on charisma, just based on the language of hope, just based on this kind of nebulous idealism. Barack Obama never really said anything to black people about policy, about the particulars or the details of things.
Right.
And what you have to look at is that Barack Obama, he got his strategies from black preachers. I mean, Barack Obama, he was with, Jeremiah Wright at Trinity United Church of Christ. Obama studied, the charismatic styles of black ministers, and he used that to great effect. It was, very persuasive, in terms of us. I mean, it was the imagery. We saw the family, the two daughters, Michelle Obama. So this is how, black people have been manipulated, over and over and over and over again, And so, I mean, that's the underside in terms of the pulpit, that the pulpit has been effective in nulling our senses. The ministers, the ministers have functioned. Black ministers have always lived under the criticism that they are no different from pimps. Okay, and the pimp has always been good in terms of language. So we have a very powerful rhetorical tradition. And we use the language of love and hope, and other type of notions that come out of our religious traditions. And what happens is that when you do too much of that, you create a culture that is desensitized to facts. Okay, so you think about this. I mean,
we're gonna have to give him a love offering.
Yeah,
man, I totally agree with you, bro.
Prosperity preaching.
They're gonna put a hit on you. They're gonna put a hit on you, Dr. Neal. Let me stop.
Prosperity preaching, has been very, popular in Black, society and everything. And, a lot of that prosperity stuff was built on false promises, false hope. The idea that God is like, Santa Claus, or God is this endless piggy bank that you can, draw from, or what have you. And what happened is that they play with ideas about the kingdom of God and notions about you being good. So Creflo Dollar, he's been successful because he'll say that one's material existence is a consequence of one being faithful to God. Okay, that you've lived out these values, giving your tithes and offerings. Not only that, morally pure in a certain kind of way, and consequently, you have all this money, you have these cars, you have these houses, and all that kind of stuff. And then when you look at the number of millionaires that these preachers have, it's hard to justify what they're saying. You look at capitalism and how the system actually works. And so the point is that Black people have been victimized by the underside of religion. We have been victimized by the side of religion that exploits. And I can go back, even Karl Marx, he classically known for criticizing religion as being a kind of opium, kind of drug. Right? Yeah, absolutely. And so we have been led for far too long by these type of charismatic figures.
Your fate is before you. Choose wisely.